It's good to be back. I was away for a while. I had some business in Melbourne to attend to. We had some absencees to attend to. But we're finally back, Pichy, Louis, Matt, to talk about film. Although there is a bit of a delay in this week. We actually watch the films on Friday, and I usually record things in person. It's not the best place to be recording things, but I prefer to have the visual indicators of when turn-taking is occurring in conversation in order to more easily prevent things like people talking over the top of each other. However, there were technical problems on Friday, like me forgetting to bring the correct audio cables, so we're instead taping this online. As a result, there will probably be some gaps at various points in conversation where people are working out whose turn it is to speak, and when I did this before, I actually left all of the gaps in. I'm not going to do that this time because that took me way too long to fix in post, so please bear with us and enjoy the show. I'll now bring everyone back online. How you going, everyone?
Oh, Jesus.
Hello.
Hello, I am very well, thank you. How are you?
Well, I'm fine. I'm taping a show.
Oh.
Yeah, hello.
Now,
Alright.
the films that we watched this week were Tomorrowland and The Incredibles, both films written and directed by Brad Bird, known animator, and The Incredibles is pretty good. Tomorrowland is terrible. I've been trying to work out the best way to start our discussion of these films, because there's a bunch of angles I could have taken, and I think the angle I'm going to take is I'm going to read to you a text which I heard on the way to driving on Friday to watch the movies. Are you ready? This is written by some bloke called John. Alright.
Alright, I'm ready.
You say you want a revolution. Well, you know, we all want to change the world. You tell me that it's evolution. Well, you know, we all want to change the world. But when you talk about destruction, don't you know that you can count me out? Don't you know it's gonna be alright, alright, alright. You say you've got a real solution. Well, you know, we'd all love to see the plan. You ask me for a contribution. Well, you know, we're doing what we can. But if you want money for people with minds that hate, all I can tell is, brother, you have to wait. Don't you know it's gonna be alright, alright, alright. You say you'll change the Constitution. Well, you know, we all want to change your head. You tell me it's the institution. Well, you know, you better free your mind instead. But if you go carrying pictures of Chairman Mao, you aren't gonna make it with anyone anyhow. Don't you know it's gonna be alright? Alright. 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 Alright.
It's fine.
It's fine. Can't you see he's fine?
It's fine, this is fine.
The song's always an interesting one for me because it's trying to criticize particular forms of, well, obviously the Maoist movement that was occurring at the time. Though it does very much have this veneer of people who are saying everything's going fine right now, so you shouldn't be too critical of our society. Because, you know, like maybe you just aren't being optimistic enough about how good things are. And you should be uncritical, man. Just relax and enjoy things, as our rights will be stripped away over the next 20 years when we decide to vote in Margaret Thatcher.
Oh, the Beatles.
So with all that in mind, Tomorrowland. I guess I should mention what Tomorrowland is. It is a section of the Disneyland theme park, which has a futuristic theme. I mentioned back when we discussed Robot Carnival, how when I was a child I used the rocket ship ride with adjustable height to watch the Disney parade. The other notable parts of Tomorrowland I'm going to bring up now are that it is the ancestral home of Space Mountain, aka Ric Flair's penis, which is a very Mad Mouse-style roller coaster but it's almost entirely darkness, just with cool LED lights. Probably not LED when it was originally made in the 60s, but you get the point. It's like you're getting teetering through this amazing thrill ride through space. It's a really, really good roller coaster. And there is another ride of note that I'll mention called Star Tours, which began in 1987. It's one of those rides where you sit in and some stuff plays on a screen and the seats get jostled around a bunch and you go, whoa, we're flying through the ship. The thing is, it's a Star Wars themed ride, which was there from 1987 through 2010 before it was replaced with Star Tours 2, meaning that, well, Disney was eyeing off the Star Wars franchise decades before they finally acquired ownership of it.
So part of the mouse's evil plan.
Yes.
For a movie about a theme park, we spend very little time in the theme park.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so...
Can I ask if this is a corollary to, like, the Pirates of the Caribbean kind of thing? This is a movie about the park. Like,
yeah, that's what I was going to mention
the gem
next.
Of the idea.
There have been numerous attempts by Disney over the years to make film adaptations of theme park rides. And Pirates of the Caribbean, Curse of the Black Pearl is the only time it has ever worked. If you think this is bad,
Yeah.
I'm not sure whether this is the worst Disney film based on a theme park attraction, because Tomorrowland is terrible, as we'll get to. But there's also the Country Bears, the movie. An attraction from Disney World, which is a bunch of, well, animatronic bears that sing country music. And they made a movie out of it in, like, 2002. And, oh my goodness me, the special effects are terrible. Just the worst CG. While a kid gleefully reveals that part of his family are fucking bears.
Okay, don't worry. Yeah,
Train of thought's been destroyed by singing country music.
Yeah, I'm curious as to how much effort it took them to get this made compared to something like Pirates. Is there some sort of like opposite, reciprocal correlation with how much the execs actually want this movie and how well it turns out?
Well, there's some good content on the history of the Pirates of the Caribbean's production and how Michael Eisner nixed it multiple times. And Jerry Bruckheimer and company basically started shooting it in secret.
Yeah.
But Tomorrowland was one that was, hey, look, we could do a movie based on a theme attraction. And it was bounced around for years. And then Brad Bird kind of just jumped up and said, yeah, I want to do that. I've got some ideas. Let's do that. That'll be really cool.
He certainly had ideas. He didn't know how to execute them, though.
Yeah. At one point, the working title of the film was 1952, and it was going to have much more of a focus on discovering some sort of conspiracy inside Disneyland, which lets you discover a retro-futuristic society, which would have been an interesting film. I think I'll get to...
Does sound better than what we got.
I think I'll get to one of the issues of this film, is that it's kind of broken in concept. It's a film which has a retrofuturistic society that live in secret in a pocket dimension, and there was a way you could access them at the Disneyland attractions that were revealed at the World's Fair in 1964 in New York, but it's mostly a film set in modern times about a girl who kind of follows a trail which leads her to Tomorrowland, but she has no narrative core and no emotional core. Really, it's a film about George Clooney who got booted out of the retrofuturistic society and learning to let go of certain facets of the past and look towards the future. And so, the film is terrible at discussing a retrofuturistic secret society. It's terrible at being a follow the clues to discover the retrofuturistic society modern days film. And it spends so much time not focusing on who the actual main character is.
It's appalling just on how many levels this movie fails. It's
Yeah.
I mean, it does sound, like you say, it does sound like a much better film, the idea of one, that 1952 idea, where you're either exploring the idea of a creation of some kind of like futuristic society or someone trying to discover it in some way, like some kind of thriller, you know. And I think you're absolutely right in that it's like the girl. I don't even remember her name, unfortunately. But the girl who's
NASA
supposedly the
Cap
lead character. NASA Cap girl.
Until I look up her name with my keyboard here.
Is it Cassie?
Ooh, you might be right.
Her surname's Newton. I remember that because like science. The science guy.
Yeah. Isaac. Yeah, it's a baffling movie.
Casey Newton.
Yeah. Casey Newton. Yeah, she is a fake protagonist. She is
Fake protagonist.
Protagonist. Protagonist. That's a good word for it. Yeah. Clearly, George Clooney's character is the one who has the main arc through the film, and because we have a protagonist through most of the film, he doesn't have that good of an arc because we don't really. We see him for like a few seconds at the start of the film, or at least after a.
You see him as a child.
Exceptionally.
At the start. Oh, all right. Oh my goodness me! The opening,
the framing device. Yeah.
Should we just get to that while we're here? Shall we go on that tangent? Just follow where the tangents lead us for this film.
Sure.
All right. So, I've mentioned how this film is bad at being a quest about. A quest to discover a retrofuturistic society, or being a film that explores someone discovering and living in a retrofuturistic society. The film has a cold opening of George Clooney and Britt Robertson, who's the protagonist, arguing about the correct way to begin their film. And so they're basically holding a hand cam and arguing about the way they should be introducing a topic of some sort. Well, at the same time, it looks like they're working with a hand cam, but it also keeps being interspersed with cuts to a studio camera looking at a ticking clock made out of tubes. So it's bad at even using the hand cam framing device within the first 2 minutes of the film. And this is before the fact that, there's an old joke that the way that you start a webcomic poorly is that your first strip will be the characters saying hi, where the characters... This is our webcomic. Hope it turns out good. In fact, the best commercial example of this is the very first Garfield strip. Let me dig it up. It's basically John Arbuckle facing the camera and saying, "Hi, I'm John Arbuckle. I'm a cartoonist. This is my cat Garfield. Hope this is gonna be an entertaining comic." And Garfield thinks, "Feed me." We're comparing this movie to Garfield. That's the level of awful this film is pushing us to.
It is. Oh yeah, sorry, you go.
No, I was gonna. It's not a great way to start your movie. It's not a great way to telegraph things to your audience when you're bickering over where to start and whether it's going to be interesting or not.
Mm-hmm.
I find that it's the same way you've watched a very poor film when you see a gag reel at the end during your ending credits.
Hey. There's some very good Pixar films which do that.
Okay, well, there's always going to be exceptions to the...
Also Muppet Treasure Island.
Alright, well, exceptions to the rule. I think this is also a way of knowing you're about to watch a bad film, when you have characters discuss how the story should start, and they have this kind of a framework to start it. It's always it's so cringeworthy at the start of this film. You're uncomfortable in your seat watching it, and you're like, oh no.
Yeah, the attempts at banter are just the worst.
They're not even funny.
There's no charisma. There's barely any humor to them. It's just, if you ever wanted to see an adult grumbling with the child that they're supposed to be babysitting for the evening, it's that.
Yeah, it's like I've never felt so little chemistry from George Clooney Because like he's normally like incredibly charismatic and funny, and he's just sort of there.
And it's kind of interesting because this is one of the films, the rare George Clooney films, where he isn't being very George Clooney. He's trying to be this bitter man who was rejected by society because of his contributions to it, and has a big bunch of emotional baggage. Like, this isn't the usual smooth, charismatic figment of Sandra Bullock's imagination while she's trying to get through space.
His greatest role. As a brief aside, I guess one exception I can think of, like, in terms of starting your story with how should we tell a story? I remember Rapicano did an alright job first episode with that. So there's the exception to the rule there.
And it's important because Bacano has such a gigantic ensemble cast that having some form of framing device of, yo, here's a girl, she's trying to piece together the pieces. It also helps that the rest of the narrative is intentionally fragmented as well. And like, that's concurrently discussing events in 4 different dates, some of which have the same characters in them. In fact,
while with Tomorrowland, while with Tomorrowland, there's no real reason for it at all.
Yeah, none at all.
It feels very shoehorned in.
And even if they did things the way that, even if they wanted to have an opening scene of a kid being exposed to a land, then hard cut to the future, you did not need the introductions. They could have just had date, location, things happen, hard cut to a different place, and you're going, whoa, what's happening? And that sort of disorientation would help to add to the, well, now there's a mystery that we've got to unpack to work out why the film has taken us to here now, immediately. And that, like, conveys the tone of a mystery to unwrap.
Oh my god, this actually was supposed to be a mystery, wasn't it? It was supposed to be a mystery movie. It's so bad at what it does that I have to like be reminded what this genre actually is, like what genre this movie's supposed to be in.
Yeah, well, beyond science fiction. Oh, I mean, so the fragments of the mystery are Casey Newton receives a magic pin. The magic pin, she looks on eBay to find other people who have owned this magic pin, finds some eccentric people in Texas. Then a robot appears, drives her to George Clooney's house, and then George Clooney takes her to an escape pod, and then takes her to a different teleporter, that then takes her to Paris, where they're exactly where they need to be in Paris immediately, and he just shows her, oh yeah, there's a room in the Eiffel Tower that shows an ancient conspiracy, and then they're immediately in the retrofuturistic society. So they're not really piecing together any sort of narrative elements and little bits and breadcrumbs that'll lead you on this trail of discovery and recontextualizing your understanding of modern scientific knowledge and various organizations' cabals. It's no, you happen to have a robot that was chasing you because you're the special, and she'll take you to a guy who will do the rest of the plot for you.
Yeah, the protagonist doesn't actually do anything in this movie. Besides at the very start when she, like, sabotages the NASA thing.
Yeah, a completely futile
and I guess
gesture,
eBay,
which is really poorly discussed as well. So, now I'm trying to work out where to go from here, because there's a number of spots we can go. Shall we?
Yeah, sorry. No,
you go.
Well, I really, because we were talking about the horrible framing device at the start, but there was also, I had complaints about the bit after that too, where we have George Clooney as a child being introduced to Tomorrowland, which kind of, like, as we were talking just before about the lack of mystery, like, we already know there is a Tomorrowland in the first 5-10 minutes of the film, because after that horrible framing device, we see him discover it, like, immediately.
Yeah, so like there's no mystery to behind the pin, because it's like we already know what it is.
Yep.
Yeah, and I feel like because we have a protagonist and one that is like a real protagonist in George Clooney that's hidden behind her, we have scenes with the kid with Henry. Oh no, sorry, Henry.
Oh, there's
I have
some foreshadowing
Henry
as soon as you read
2.0
the
in
script.
my. I have Henry 2.0 in the notes. I'm obviously talking about Book
She's
of
the
Henry. I
prototype.
find that. Yeah.
2 years earlier.
I feel like both characters, both the protagonist and George Clooney's characters, have that kind of Henry type character of just them being ridiculously special. And they're being head and shoulders above everyone else. We're probably going to get to that later, though.
Yeah, there's two things we can get into there, which are like the film's perspective and ideology, as well as just this film's really poor use of the special chosen one narrative. I think while we're throwing shit on Book of Henry once again, best bad film in years, I guess technically it's older because Greg Hurwitz's first script was written in like the 90s. The other thing to mention is this fun tidbit of information that's come to light in the last month or so, which is Greg Hurwitz is a disciple and good friend of everyone's favorite current snake oil salesman, Jordan Peterson. And indeed, Jordan has spoken glowingly of the Book of Henry.
Oh God, of course he has.
Do you ever get the feeling that just like in Hydra in the Marvel universe, all the bad people in the world might secretly be like connected with each other?
Like the requirement for Hydra is like that there's a questionnaire, which is how strongly do you agree with these points from Colin Trevorrow films? See, I like
Hydra
how
list.
you're developing a thing here where, like, you'll always use Marvel Cinematic Universe examples. I'll always use anime and wrestling examples. Louis still finding his voice.
I did talk about Bacano, to be fair. I did throw that out there.
You dropped the anime before I did. I'm very proud of you.
Yeah. Thank you. But yeah, they just do such a terrible job with the kid, with George Clooney's character, in that, like, we have like a few seconds with him to show that his father doesn't like him. We see that he is a genius.
Most cliche, just hit the beat. Bad dad, his dreams big. Dad says he'll go nowhere. So will Hugh Laurie.
And they have to be quick with it because they have to put in a whole new protagonist afterwards. So it's knowing how like they actually get in each other's way. They're both the protagonists in this film, because there's only supposed to be one of them, and for some reason there's two of them, and it means that neither of them are fleshed out correctly because they don't have time for either of them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's highly frustrating, I think.
And it's not like there's any interesting meta narrative about how would you have a story with two protagonists.
It's also funny that we're saying that there's not that much time. This is a 2-hour film. Like, that should be enough to have two fleshed out characters. But it doesn't know what to do with either of them, and it would rather waste time with boring chase scenes.
I feel like most of this film is probably chase scenes, right? Like, that's got to take up
like, it feels like it, but it's probably less than we remember. It's just that they're all bunched together and towards the end of the second act. So they stick out in your mind much more strongly.
Yeah.
Because, like, the first act of the film is really freaking long, because it's got a bunch of pieces that it wants to put together, but it introduces them in such a sloppy way. So we instead get, like, these long stretches of just Casey Newton in a car with the android girl, and things like that.
Yeah, we haven't talked about the android girl very much. Like, we haven't even, like, introduced her. Like, there's the linking point, I guess, between them is... Yeah, she was good. She just wasn't giving anything.
She had, like, one good line.
Was it the one where she's like, she says, at least the one that I liked anyway. We'll see if it's the same as yours. The one where she's basically accused of creating the situation, and she just says something along the lines of just like, "Oh, I just gave them the pin. That's all I did."
She did. Yeah, I just gave her the pin. She did everything else. It's like, hang on a minute. You basically kidnapped her and you broke the handle off the door. You are completely... This whole thing is your fault.
Yeah, there's that line. I am kind of fond as far as the lame, quippy jokes. The one I kind of like is, early on, she refuses to answer a bunch of protagonists' questions. and saying that it'll set off a protocol where she'll just shut off for a while. So she does.
Oh, yeah.
And then later on, George Clooney says, "You don't have that function." She goes, "Yeah, she was just annoying me."
Yeah.
It's just, like, I can appreciate that level of brutal honesty.
There's like some oh shit, this is gonna frustrate me. What's her name from Big O? Where it's
Oh man, Dorothy Wainwright. There's a good android.
Like, there's like some subtle, like, she actually knows what she's doing.
Oh yeah, like Dorothy is a wonderfully. Are you talking about just specifically Dorothy here, or just reminding me of Dorothy?
I guess, yeah, reminding me of Dorothy and how she's trying to play it off as like she's innocent in this, but she knows what she's doing.
Yeah. A very coy android that is using the default assumption of no emotion to just deadpan stuff.
Yeah.
I feel like the better joke was... Oh, sorry.
No, it's cool. I like it, that's all.
I feel like the better joke, though, was done in Revengeance. I feel like the end point of her joke with George Clooney, like, "Oh, I didn't laugh because you weren't funny." That's like the last thing. Like that's like they literally did it better in a video game. Like in Revengeance, I'm pretty sure writing keeps trying to tell jokes.
Hideo Kojima is a far superior auteur to Brad Bird.
And that's none of us are like a part of the cult of Kojima, so that just shows that how bad Brad Bird is. Because we do have our problems with Kojima, I think, all three of us. But yeah, I would agree that I would much prefer watching or playing something from Kojima.
Yeah, we'll save that for when we do the comprehensive film review of Metal Gear Solid 4. No.
I'm not sure where you want to go from here, but could I complain a little bit about the girl now? Because we talked about the first
We've been talking about her,
protagonist.
so let it rip.
Yeah, I feel like one of the things that could have been a lot better for her was a better motivation in order to like get to Tomorrowland. Like I feel, and it's a shame because I feel like they had one. They literally created one for her. Yeah, and then they forgot about it or just didn't care. Yeah.
Well, they remember it enough to bring it up right at the end when everything's being resolved. But it's not something that's on her mind in between those 2 points.
Yeah, except the fact that she has the hat.
Yeah.
And that's a part of her character.
But that's just science. That's just a science thing that the person named Newton can have to be science while they do their science thing.
Alright, so I guess I should just give the grounding here of what we're talking about. So, Casey Newton's father is a NASA engineer, but NASA are winding down operations and halting all of their space flights, which is the thing that was happening at the time the film was being written, was they were shutting down the space shuttle project. Of course, it was because they are looking at alternate means of space transportation than using these decades-old space shuttles, which are probably a bit inefficient by now. And so her means of protesting this is she goes out every night and attempts to sabotage the demolition of the space shuttle launch pad, even though this isn't really going to do anything. Like, it will continue to happen, but as far as she's concerned, so long as it hasn't been dismantled yet, there's still hope that we might be able to go to space one day. And at the same time, since they're winding down operations, her father gets retrenched. And it's mentioned in one line in one conversation. The only conversation she has with her father that you see both sides of, she has one other phone conversation with him that you hear none of his side on, and that's it. It's not mentioned for the next hour and 40 minutes.
It's such a shame because it's a ready-made motivation to however they decide she discovers. It turns out in the film she gets the pin and she sees starts to piece together this idea of what Tomorrowland might be. It would have been so easy to change the movie a little bit where her primary motivation to find Tomorrowland or whatever these futurist people are is she's trying to find a way to save her father's job, trying to save that platform.
Yep.
And they don't do that at all. The actual thing where she's dumb about like sabotaging the platform, like in a better movie, you can like she's a teenager, so the fact that she's not completely logical about it isn't the worst thing in the world. And that
you can build something with that. Like it's part of a broken understanding of how to do things. In a better film, this would illustrate that she's fiery and wants to accomplish things, but she doesn't yet have the understanding and skill set in order to be able to. So a better film would then use this as a building point to say, okay, now you're going to actually learn some of the logistical realities of how you accomplish goals, how you actually make things happen. But instead, it uses this to highlight her ideal of optimism is the sole driving force that will make anything happen, and if you wish upon a star, to use the Disney parlance since this is a Disney film, then dreams will come true. You've just got to believe. Blind faith is more important than any sort of implementation of achieving outcomes.
Well, it's a literal thing. It's a literal thing. She believes hard enough that percentages literally go down of the Earth being destroyed. Literally.
She alters probability itself.
Yes, she's a superhero. She's like, or at least like supernatural at the very least.
Yeah, I think at this point we should get to the special as it pertains to this film. Isn't it great that we watched this immediately after the Lego movie?
Yeah. Which did it so much better.
Yeah, well, it's all about deconstructing the concept of chosen one narratives and discussing how identity can be constructed and is malleable. Whereas it's even better in this one because she begins by being the most daring person in her class whenever she hears doom and gloom, she responds, how can we fix it? But then she abandons any pretense of working out how to fix things because a robot keeps telling her that she's the bestest, she's the most special, she's the one who will save the future. And then she does nothing for the rest of the film, and it applauds her and pats her on the back for doing nothing.
She's not really the protagonist. It's, And
even then, it's not like her optimism is really what impacts George Clooney or is the resolution of his arc. The resolution of his arc is letting go of the past by letting the android that was the object of his affection die for a greater cause.
What? Why is her optimism somehow? Because like the moment that
she's
there's
special, because this is a fictional narrative.
Yeah, no, I get that, but I'm stuck on like some of the internal logic of this movie.
Yeah, because it's broken
standing
logic.
Yeah,
it just
they're
doesn't
standing
work.
in the monitor, right? They're standing in the monitor, and she like, what does she says something after she sees that like everywhere's gonna get blown up, and she like stamps her foot and then runs off, and then there's like a flicker, and then George Clooney like looks at Huge Laurie and is like, see? It's like, aren't you like, okay, so one, why does only her optimism affect it? And two, if you're now optimistic, why doesn't that affect it?
Mm-hmm.
Is it only her optimism? I don't understand how the internal, like, how this universe works. None of it makes sense.
Oh yeah. Sorry.
Sorry, no, go.
The other part that's wonky about it is that she establishes her optimism by doing things because George Clooney has Okay, so if you haven't seen Tomorrowland, one of the things that is a part of the plot is back in the 60s, at some point between the 60s and now, George Clooney, in the secret retrofuturistic society, he built a machine that could see into the future. They use some wibbly-wobbly explanation of how it can do so.
Tachyon.
But he discovers that the world is going to end sometime in the early 21st century. This is the plot to Fate Grand Order. And So because he's discovered this machine, everyone goes, well, thanks a lot, Dick. Way to make us this doomsday machine that we can't turn off. So we're gonna boot you out of our society, and then keep frowning as we look at this doomsday machine.
And
he's still tapping in and monitoring the doomsday machine, and protagonist finds the room where he's got where he's tapped into the machine, and is there. George Clooney's all, yeah, the world's gonna end, and she says, I refuse to accept that, and the 100% probability of the world's end drops down to 99.6. So we've established here, and she has seen that this is what happens when she refuses to accept it, but then her low point in her arc, such as her arc is she then goes to the actual machine, sees that, yeah, the world's gonna end pretty soon, says, I refuse to accept this, and storms out. Again, you get that flicker, as Louis mentioned, that doesn't happen. But she just happens to not see that because she was storming out in fury. This is then immediately followed by her moping about, because the machine showed her that the world's gonna end, when we've already established that she refuses to accept this. So, it forces her into the conventional Hollywood narrative arc, because that is where the bit in the movie where you're supposed to do that thing, but it makes no sense for her character to be feeling that way at that point. This is what I mean by bad movie. Just parts of the film collapse on their own narrative and emotive beats, because it hasn't thought things through in any regard.
It's a real mess. The whole thing makes sense.
I mean, why does... I mean, why... It's not like the machine is causing... Like, at this point, so when they find out that it's the end of the world soon, it's not like it's that machine that's causing it. So why do they kick out George Clooney then? Because that doesn't make any sense to me, right? Because it's like, okay, all you've done is like show that it's going to happen. It's not like the machine's causing that, but they just get mad and kick him out.
Hugh Laurie booted him out as part of a power play, even though the film implies that even before young George Clooney joined them, the secret society was to some extent run by Hugh Laurie anyway.
Well, this is what I mean by how they have to speed up the stuff with George Clooney in the past. In order to make room for the rest of the movie with the fake antagonist, because, you know, there's a lot of stuff that happens between when he, it rushes him getting there. Like as you said, we have a cliche scenes with his dad and the cliche scenes with him having an invention to Hugh Laurie. And then everything between then and the present day of the film is really rushed over when there's a movie there. Mm-hmm. There's a movie of George Clooney creating this, discovering Tomorrowland and finding what it's like there, and you know what the power structures are like there, and how the place just works essentially, while also creating his what his invention is, and that's something that can see into the future, and what troubles you can get into by creating such a device. And it's skipped over so much that, well, when Adam was explaining it, it makes sense. The basic structure of the film, that this is what George Clooney did. It's actually kind of convoluted and really difficult really to work out what's going on in the film. Like, it's not quite clear until maybe right at the end of the film exactly what is going on and exactly what happened in Tomorrowland, because we spend so little time there that it's actually very confusing to work out exactly how Tomorrowland's supposed to work, how the machine's supposed to work. All these kind of questions are just not... There's no time to answer them, really.
And they spend no time discussing how Tomorrowland as a society functions, or has ceased to function, because you don't see anyone who actually lives in Tomorrowland. George Clooney briefly, as a child, sees some people. Then the rest of the time that you see people in Tomorrowland, it's via the Pin, which is an advertising campaign, playing basically a virtual reality advertisement for this cool place that you can come to if you're really, really special and the android likes you. And so then the only actual Denzians at Tomorrowland you see are Hugh Laurie in a styling new evil bad guy outfit and a couple of hired goons with guns. You know nothing about how people live, what ideas are being discussed, what the way of life is now that they've been faced with this big doomsday foretelling device. And that's before we get to the actual plot point of, apparently Hugh Laurie's plan is to make sure that the doomsday machine is broadcasting subconscious brainwaves into our world, because this is a pocket dimension that Tomorrowland's in. And create a self-fulfilling prophecy where everyone is subconsciously being more negative. Therefore, there will be catastrophic storms that will destroy the world at the same time as a nuclear war.
And famine and everything else that could possibly go wrong. Apparently,
And in
will happen
doing
at
so,
the same time.
Hugh Laurie will have proven himself right, even though he didn't make the machine. This is part of the problem of George Clooney making the machine, which is another one of the many, many problems with this narrative, is that if Hugh Laurie had made the machine, and George Clooney caught him out on it and was exiled for that, then you would go, okay, this guy is being an isolationist prick. But it's not.
Yeah,
George Clooney
he's
made
doing
the
something
machine, and then
nefarious.
Hugh Laurie uses it to grab power that he already had.
Yeah,
This is
there's
the problem
like,
with sorry.
Oh,
Okay.
no, I was just gonna say is that there's a bunch of stuff that you could really, like, really minor changes that would make anything interesting.
Or anything function.
Hmm.
It's all those movies that it's so rushed and so vague, and as Adam was saying, how the different elements just don't mesh well together. That we can probably spend a lot of time like picking apart basically the movie bit by bit and saying this would be better or this would be better. There's multiple options to fix each and every point, and you can make like so many different movies out of this. You could make a thriller about trying to discover a secret society. You could have a almost disaster kind of film, like something in the vein of a BioShock, where you just come upon this futuristic society that's apparently just destroyed or destroying itself, and you wonder why. You know, there's different stories to be done here, but it's just because it's such a terrible movie. It's a bad movie. Like, it's just in every shape and form.
All right, you brought up
So-
BioShock, so I'm going to take that opportunity because
Oh no.
we could just we could get bogged down in nitpicking every single detail of this film because it is a fun one to tear apart that way. But I think we should pull things back a bit and start looking at the forest rather than the trees, and talking about the themes and some of the ideology present in this film. I guess we'll get to the themes later, but there is certainly an ideological thread throughout this film of Ayn Rand objectivism. There is certain sorts of truth. Now, of course, objectivism's argument of truth is that only individuals can only perceive the truth that is true to themselves. Therefore, putting yourself first is the ideal good, is the ideal model of behavior, and indeed is a moral imperative. Therefore, being selfish is very important. One of the things that Ayn Rand brings up numerous times in her proposals is that basically everyone who is really, really talented and smart and creative should be able to operate in a way in which they're not barred by anything, not barred by resource limitations, not barred by ethics and moral guidelines, and certainly not by any sort of bureaucratic guidelines. And that in doing so, then just like in Atlas Shrugged, they'll be able to work together and discover magic, if we go by the text of Atlas Shrugged. In this case, apparently Tomorrowland is a secret cabal of super genius scientists and creatives like that as well, and the film presents this as a good thing. But again, it's tied to this wish upon a star mentality, where the only reason that they didn't help people beforehand isn't because this sort of approach will lead to being inherently selfish and isolationist, but rather because they weren't thinking positively enough. So it's like some of the most cowardly and pathetic of Ayn Rand's ideas, mixed with the sort of banal cowardice of certain Disney narratives, to create like this worst of both worlds situation, where it manages to espouse an idea while also managing to say nothing at all.
Yeah, I remember because we talked about this before we actually started watching the film, about the objectivist leanings of the film, and I was a bit worried that when I watch it, that I wouldn't see it. They might be too subtle for me, and I would be like, "Oh no, we're supposed to talk about this subjectivist stuff," and I didn't see it. um,
And
as it
then
turned
this
out,
guy is all, hey, imagine if there was a secret society where all the bestest people in the world actually got together and did something together.
Yeah, that made me sad because
It's
Keegan
not
Michael
quite as-
Key is
Oh, sorry.
great, and sorry. It's like this guy did good things. There are actors and people in this who can do good things. Stop doing this to people.
I guess it's not as bad as, say, the Sword of Truth Book 2, the one where Objectivist Superman travels to not the USSR and owns the libs by making a statue. I guess we're not quite at that level of bad. But yeah, this is one where it's just like, there's this line of thought that runs through the film. It's not fully espoused being a moral imperative that society should be this way. It's just there as, hey, wouldn't that be nice? Would it be nice if they were nice people as well? And they would be if they thought more positively.
there's a line. We already talked a lot about the start of the film, but I didn't talk about this because we weren't talking about this yet. But there was a line that George Clooney, as a kid, said that was immediately like, "Oh, yep, I see where this is going." Like, essentially, he's got a jetpack that he's trying to make. He's showing it to Hugh Laurie, and Hugh Laurie is just like, "Why did you make this? Why did you decide to do this thing?" And he said, "I didn't want to wait for someone else to do it for me." And I felt like that line just completely, I was like, all right, I get exactly what this is going for right now. Like that kind of idea where these special people,
Be a lifter, not a
they
leader.
have, yeah, and that kind of like subtle jab at anyone who is not as special as him. Like, I'm not sure if I'm the only one that sees it like that, but that's to me how the line read to me. It was like, look at these fucking parasites that that are just waiting for a handout, just waiting for someone else to invent it, but not me, not Henry 2.0. No, he's gonna make things. And
I mean, it comes across like it's like the line on its own. It sounds like they're trying to be like, I don't want to have to wait for it to get made the normal way. I'm gonna I think they're trying to go for like
Take
I'm
down
gonna
the
take
system,
destiny.
man.
I think they're trying to say is like I'm gonna take destiny into my own hands and do it myself now instead of waiting for like, I don't know, an adult to design it and make it for Boeing. But it comes across as I'm gonna make it for myself because fuck everybody else who's not as special.
But you see, it shall become a cultural symbol which will inspire others to do great things.
I felt so inspired.
The subtlety of a hammer, this film.
Because I mean, doesn't
obviously,
he?
in the
He
case of a
literally
jetpack,
says that.
In the case of a jetpack, I mean, we could talk about specific examples here, but we need to be talking in general. Because there's the general ideas that are present in this film that really help make it. It's what causes the film to collapse under its own weight. So, I think the next thing I want to say is I don't want to make this too much of a Brad Bird is a horrible person and a horrible director. He's made some very good films, one of which we watched immediately after this. But rather, I'm not even sure if the ideas present are the direct result of trying to proselytize the virtue of selfishness and so on. I think it's just the product of, look, Brad Bird is a straight white man in Hollywood who grew up in a rich family that were part of the fossil fuel industry, and they were able to afford to just send him through animation school. He easily found contact by being mentored by a straight white guy in a baseball cap. He became a straight white guy in a baseball cap. It's more the product of just the worldview and the society and the circumstances that he grew up in kind of lead, in America, basically lead to you having that sort of worldview to begin with. And that the film having these ideas is less, I want to make Randian Superman argument, but rather just this is the way we see things, isn't it? This is the right way to be looking at the world, and no one ever really gave him an experience that told him otherwise. And
Yeah,
so-
it's someone whose life lacked nuance and is making now a movie that lacks nuance.
Yep.
And
Nicely put.
seems to struggle to. Thank you. Yeah, it's something where you would hope that. Well, even despite all of that, you would hope just like basic understanding of how a story works would help him.
And it's so weird
Even if
because
there's
I think we should just mention The Incredibles now as an incredibly well-structured film. Just
Yes.
the setups, reminders, and payoffs all the way through it, every facet of every character, are tremendous.
Mm.
And it's like this film,
And none of
it's
that
like
is
he
present here.
forgot how to movie.
This is where knowing like behind the scenes details, you never know how much who else's fingers are in the pie, I guess. Especially in a movie that is so messy and has so many elements that kind of rub against each other poorly. Like so many things like contradict other parts of the film that you have to wonder what was the process that the movie was made in. Like at what point was each like scene shot, when were things written? And I can't help but wonder whether there were many like redrafts and it was kind of like patched together in some way.
Yeah, it's a film where I wanted to listen to the director's commentary beforehand, but wasn't able to find a copy in time. So perhaps this will be a topic that we have to return to at some point, when I finally done so. Something else that I want to remark on the film before we start moving to The Incredibles is one of the other big themes of the film is optimism versus pessimism. In particular, the inspiration that was the idea that all the sci-fi of the 60s and 70s was about how exciting the future can be. Then it became all this nasty dystopia, even though all the dystopian novels cited in the film predate 60s and 70s optimism. Also, this ignores that the value of science fiction in general is to be descriptive. An optimistic science fiction piece is looking at the great things that are happening and the ways that we can extrapolate them further. A dystopian science fiction novel is about looking at things that are happening in the world today, taking them to certain extremes to say, how, look, these are the sorts of things we need to be identifying and dealing with as our society and in culture. So not only does the film misunderstand that sort of thing, its relentless approach makes it hard to argue with the film, because it can always counter with, well, you're just being Nancy. You're just saying no. You're letting the negativity seep in. You're feeding the wrong wolf, man. Can't you just sit back and relax? Again, going back to the Revolution lyrics. Like,
Yeah.
you say you'll change the Constitution. Well, we all want to change your head. You tell me it's the institution. Well, you better free your mind instead. You're just being a naysayer, man. Why can't you just think more positively? And I'm someone who very actively tries to be optimistic in my outlook, particularly when I'm in things like oppressive work environments. And when it comes to political discussion, I'm very big supporter of the fact that, particularly as an Australian, we have quite a well-functioning democratic society. We have the right to protest. We have easy access to our elected members of parliament. We have functioning separation of powers. And while there's certainly big issues, particularly when it comes to matters like political donations, we still live in a society where if we make our voices heard and talk to the right people and put the right people up for vote in the first place, then we can really affect positive change in our society. And so I'm not quite at that burn everything down point in my personal political beliefs. Where was I going with? So, having a film like this, which is so vapid, but runs with this argument which kind of creates this own barrier around itself, is really, really frustrating to me.
Yeah, well, it shows that song choice at the start was really good in the way it links to what we were saying about Brad Bird, in that it's a vapid song for a vapid director that made a vapid movie. what am I trying to say? I had like a good.
I think what I'm saying is that the film runs on a certain degree of ad hominem. Where if you try to criticize it, it just flings it right back at you. Well, that's the point, man. Why you gotta be so mean?
Oh, that's what I was. Yeah, the idea like you have someone here, like the Beatles probably were in a good place at that point, and they were probably very popular. They probably had a lot of money. So them saying that everything is fine, it shows their particular worldview of like, well, everything's fine for me, so surely it can't be that bad for everyone else. And this movie kind of has that same kind of feel to it, in that it can't really be that bad, surely, if we all just get together and be positive, because it's always been positive, and for the director, and for the people probably who had the creative input in this film.
Any other remarks on this film, Louis?
I don't know.
Cool.
It's probably. You were there. You saw how much it hurt.
This hurt you the most of any film we've watched.
This is for me. This is my Ben-Hur so far. Mostly because I wasn't there for Ben-Hur.
I don't know. I just can't imagine this being worse than Ben-Hur. Ben-Hur was 4 hours of fuckery.
Ben-Hur is 4 hours long.
Some people
3
got
3/4
blown up
of an
in
hour.
this movie. That was fun. People got blown up by laser guns in this film.
Oh yeah.
Automatically
I guess we'll be nice here. There is a scene where where some evil robots are investigating the scene of where Photagonist was being chased before, and he makes some quip saying, "Oh, you don't need to worry about sending in a report officer," or something like that, and then just fucking shoots them in the head with a laser gun. It's nice to see that level of cavalier murder in a Disney film.
Yeah, so there is the one thing in this movie, which is that one evil android with the amazing grin.
Oh yes.
And it's the same when they're in George Clooney's house, when they're blowing up robots and being very
Home Alone
violent
scene.
to robots.
Very weird.
Yeah, it's weird, but
it's Home Alone.
Yeah, it's creative.
Actually, speaking
though.
of, I was gonna say speaking of violent, kind of strangely placed violence for a movie about optimism, the ultimate solution is to just blow it the fuck up.
Blow it up.
yeah, punch each other, shoot each other, blow up the big thing. Yeah,
I guess that's kind of at the core of the film's hypocrisy.
Yeah,
it's just another thing that rubs up poorly against another thing.
Yeah, violent force is the ultimate solution.
Mm-hmm. Cool.
Just as there was one. Sorry, this is pretty shallow because this is just something that I found really funny in the film. I'll be really quick. Again, we kind of rubbed to it the idea of using violence. I love the fact that when she finds George Clooney, the protagonist, and he refuses to help her because he's a negative Nancy now. He doesn't have her optimism. Instead of trying to find some way to convince him, she literally just sets his starts to set his house on fire.
Yes.
Yeah, using a tractor.
Yeah, she sets his tractor on fire and just sends it towards the house. This is what a positive hero special character has decided is the right thing to do. This is how she's going to convince him, not with words, but with direct physical violence. And I love that so much. I remember thinking of if Rey had set the Jedi village on fire when Luke had refused to train her as a Jedi, if she just pulled out her blaster and just started firing, or got on a falcon and started strafing the village or something. I don't know.
To be fair, if they'd taken a bit longer and she hadn't been having those chats with Kylo, she probably would have. She's gonna look for the first opportunity to just clock him in the head, shoot him if he resists, just drag him onto that damn ship. Ray, you're great. So,
Yes.
The Incredibles is a film directed by Brad Bird. I've got a bunch of general thoughts about the film in this viewing, but the reason I chose these two together was, in the light, I wanted to see how you would feel about The Incredibles in light of having seen Tomorrowland beforehand. Did it impact your viewing as you were viewing it, or any thoughts you had on the film after it?
I'd say so. Mostly because you made a couple comments that made me think about whether there were any like story beats that there were crossovers between the movies. Turns out there were. That was kind of interesting. I was a little worried that looking back, I was actually going to realize that the movie is trash and I've been wrong the whole time, but I wasn't. So that was nice.
Yeah, it affected the first half of the film, I think, where I was looking for it. But then as the film went on, I think I just came to the conclusion that, I could search for it and I could find it if I really searched for it, but I didn't feel like it was, in terms of like looking at like maybe objectivist leanings or anything like that. It wasn't a defining part of the film. It was only there if you really wanted to search for it. And so by the second half of the film, I was back into the mode I usually am watching that film, which is enjoyment.
A sense of relief?
Yes, definitely.
Yes, in the age of the milkshake duck, for those who aren't familiar with that term, I guess I'll bring it up here, as it is Macquarie Dictionary Word of the Year 2017. It is a term which comes from a joke tweet by popular comedy Twitter account Pixelated Boat, which is an Australian comedian. He basically, without explaining the actual context of the joke, it was basically discovering that something you like is written by someone who's very problematic. So it's like, hey, I liked Rolf Harris's cover of Stairway to Heaven, but it's a shame he went to prison for child abuse. That sort of situation. And it is kind of refreshing when you're worried that a text is going to have the impact of someone later in their life and what they've done, but it is comforting to find that sometimes people did just make some genuinely good art that can say some pretty positive things. Of course, The Incredibles is a film where superpowered people beat up the guy who has no superpowers, no point of privilege. He's just worked hard to achieve all that he has. But Singer is perhaps overtly a murderer. Oh, no, he is overtly a murderer. He murdered numerous people in pursuit of his goals. He
kind of
is a war profiteer.
Yeah.
Those are really the key things. Like, it's potentially at some degree in the future enabling genocide if his plan was to be accomplished. And he's a war profiteer. And a murderer. So for all that he claimed that he wanted to some degree, redistribute the prestige and privilege that superpowered individuals have by providing people with all sorts of gadgets which can give them similar sorts of goals, he is still attempting things for utterly selfish ends and is willing to do so upon a very large pile of innocent blood.
I feel like even though that is something he's espousing, it's coming from a bad place, because it's very much like coming from a place of like spite.
Yep.
Like he doesn't want to give everybody superpowers so everyone's special. Hooray! It's fuck you, Mr. Incredible, for being a dick to me when I was younger. Because then when everybody else is special, you're not special anymore. Fuck you, Mr. Incredible.
And it's a situation he's finding. It's a situation that doesn't even exist anymore, because the people with powers, the superheroes, they're not, by that point in the film and through most of the film, they are in hiding. They're not out and about being special. They're, in fact, probably living worse lives, but there's an element of sadness to the Incredibles family during the movie.
Kind of vilified.
Now, the line about
no one likes them.
The line about people being special is also echoed much earlier in the film, indeed set up by Dash in a moment of complaint to his mother. And I think the key thing here is that although Dash ultimately is a heroic character, he's still a child, and it's in the middle of complaining because he wasn't respecting certain facets of society, and it was a part of him being... It's part of his petulant complaints about being reprimanded for his mother for the cruel pranks that he was playing on his teacher, and the fact that he was abusing his power in order to ridicule someone.
Yeah.
It's so hard because, power comes in many different forms, and it's interesting how he obviously has an unfair advantage in speed. Like, that's obvious. He just has a superpower. It's speed. He abuses that power. People abuse power every day.
What I was going to say is not
that justifies said abuses.
No, but it is just...
Even within, I just want to point out, even within like primary school, there are kids who are physically developed more than other kids who run in the same races and are far faster than anybody else.
I mean, this is when we're leading into things like there's that one female athlete who is an incredible freak athlete, and part of it is that her body produces slightly more testosterone than a lot of other women, so it tends to foster things like better muscle development. And
Michael Phelps, probably one of the greatest Olympians we will ever see, has like genetic. He is a genetic freak. Yeah, he's got like huge feet, and he's got like hyperextensive ankles. So his feet are literally like flippers. His arm span is wider than he is tall. I mean, like, he has like actual advantages.
Oh, the Olympic athlete I was bringing up, I'm going to go back to her.
Yeah, sure.
Because... Alright. Caster Semenya is the one I'm thinking of, I believe. Apologies if that's the wrong person. Anyway, so she produces a bit more testosterone than some others, which has facilitated a very strong body development. She is very much biologically a woman. She identifies as a woman. She competes as a woman. She is very definitely a woman in every sense of the word. But because her body has these inherent advantages, in particular this hormone production, there has been this very big push by people who are trying to and this also leans into discussions of transsexuality, is that they're basically trying to force her to have a reduced testosterone production in order to ensure that she's weaker and other people can beat her. Which sounds incredibly bizarre, and like, sometimes it's because people think, because of course, if you're using hormone growth therapy and treatments as part of steroid abuse in order to gain advantage that way, but this is just a case of she's just naturally this amazing freak athlete.
It's like a question of, like, into hypotheticals of, what happens if an athlete literally just made testosterone? Like, if we lived in a universe with mutants and superheroes, like, what if someone literally just had steroids that they automatically produced? Like, is that... I'm going to bring up a wrestler here.
So there's this wrestler who died recently called Bruno Sammartino, who was the guy in America in the 70s. And he was this huge mountain of a man at his peak. There's this story of... Basically, he was a very sick kid. He had rheumatic fever in Italy when he was about 12 during World War II. And when his family then was able to move to America after the war, he was bullied for being this scrawny kid, and he had heart troubles for the rest of his life due to the rheumatic fever. But he decided he wasn't going to be picked on ever again when he was about 14, and he wanted to get big and strong, so he just kept eating and eating and eating and training and training and training till he became this huge mountain of muscle. But part of the reason that he was able to do this, far more so than anyone else around him, was because he had an inherently really, really strong bone structure and larger bones than most people do, which wasn't really noticed until just suddenly his frame could safely and healthily sustain this huge amount of muscle to the level that most other people could. So, like there's all sorts of variants, and people do have inherent physical advantages over others.
And I feel like you were right. Like the child was doing the wrong thing and should have been punished, but I guess he shouldn't have been punished disproportionately more than someone who had done essentially the same thing, but just in a different way. Like, maybe I think the point I was trying to get to with the line is that you could read it as the film positively espousing this idea and then presenting a negative version of it later. The point I wanted to get to was that the line is coming out in a fit of anger and indignation by a child,
at a moment of heelishness from that character. So I think it further supports that the idea is being tied to use by villains.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. And definitely the Sindri as a villain, even as he grows old, definitely has a childish kind of view on things. That he's still kind of working on past grudges. Like as I said, like the world that he's trying to stop, like at least he's saying he's trying to stop, has already stopped. Like there is no privilege.
In
Certainly
this particular
not
field.
a great deal of privilege in this particular field of those superheroes. Like their privilege is that they're white people living in probably America. Like that's their privilege, just like any regular person in America. You know,
Mr. Incredible is able to move from job to job without any sort of trouble and any sort of serious criminal record for having physically assaulted people.
I would argue that I would say that they went from, like, obviously he has that advantage, but he also has a disadvantage of he is having to try and lock himself and be someone who he isn't.
Yeah.
I actually kind of really like Bob. I know that he's Mr. Incredible. Like I understand the arc he goes through, and I think it's a good arc of like him being obviously selfish and a bit chest thumping. But I think that ultimately he is he's a hero. Like even if he
overcomes his
genuinely
flaws.
tries to help people. Yeah. And you see it in like little things, which is important. Sorry, it's just important to me when a lot of superheroes, like, it's not just the big grand things, the grandstand saving of someone in a building or stopping the villain. Like you see it even in his bitty job that he has to be in. Like when the first thing you see if he's in the office, you see that he's helping that little old lady, you know, to his own detriment. You know, he decides that that's just what he wants to do. So
Yeah, the point that I was alluding to is just that, like, his lashing out with violence is presented in the narrative as a character flaw, and indeed, ultimately, one of his big character resolving moments is when he refuses to lash out in violence completely when it would potentially save his family's life, and he still decides that that's not the sort of person that he needs to be or should be.
You're right. Yeah. This is a good movie.
It's that much sadder that Tomorrowland is the way it is, because, like, this is such a well nuanced and interesting, visually spectacular. That was something I was going to mention here, is that the film feels more aged than it ever has for me on a viewing. Just the nature of the models and the texturing everything has really, really popped out to me as, like, this is the limitations of what you could do with computers at the time it was made. That's not to say it looks bad. The texturing and the sense of color and the sense of aesthetic is incredibly good. The film starts off with this minimalist, late, like, almost leaning into Art Deco in its early scenes, and then transitions from some sort of ambiguous 60s, 70s period to an equally ambiguous late 80s, early 90s post-Reagan-y period. And it all works. And now that we're that much more distance from when it was made, it's like, yeah, this is absolutely a 2004 looking at early 90s, looking at early 70s. So it all works. It adds a certain layer of charm and aesthetic timelessness to the whole product. And it'll be interesting to see how Incredibles 2 looks in comparison in its artistic direction.
I think it's one of those, we've talked about this a lot, like the idea of just good art direction trumping aging technology, I guess. Where it will probably always look decent, at least decent enough to watch anyway.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not quite like Toy Story 1. Is that movie?
Is that a bad looking film now?
Or it's aged quite a bit.
Yeah, it's been a while since I saw it, so I need to look at it. When I last looked at some of, like, the Snowman shorts, those still looked perfectly fine to me just because of the palette used. So it'll be interesting to look back at Toy Story 1. Maybe we'll do that sometime.
You talked about, like, how the movie has different elements to it. Like, it has some interesting complex or at least kind of complex, like things going on. I really like the idea that because I was looking after Tomorrowland, I was looking at, can I see the hints of objectivism or anything like that? I liked how, depending on how you wanted to view the film, you could get different things out of it. Like when I was looking for the objectivism, you could kind of see the start of it where you could describe what's happening at the start, where they're suing the superheroes, and essentially the society kind of rebels against them being superheroes, and they kind of create a situation where the superheroes
why do you have to be so much better than us?
Yeah, you can kind of see like all these parasite kind of regular people like having to force special people to go back into their shells and kind of like drag them back. But instead of seeing it that way, you could also see it in the same way like you might see like Marvel Mutants, where instead of seeing it as special people who like should be unfiltered by the demands of society or anything like that, or have no restrictions. Instead, you see people that are different. Superheroes, and that way you see people with powers as people who are minorities almost.
Yeah, they become
and the way that they're. Yeah, and there was a few lines with the family where the mother she tells like the kids like, sorry, we need to fit in right now. We can't show ourselves as different. And in some way that you could kind of replace special with just different or diverse. And the idea that they feel that they have to hide this. And that felt like, even like, obviously they're not doing that badly, but it did feel very sad to me. Like the idea that these family, they know that they could be different. They know that and who they are is different from
societal
the norm.
Societal limitations of your expression of identity are always going to be irritating to yourself because you want to be the person who you think you are.
And you can see it that way.
It's particularly sad for the kids if we're looking at it that way, because I mean they weren't involved in that in any way. I mean it's literally Mr. Incredible's actions that lead to that.
Mm-hmm.
Like I mean he kind of caused all of that. He caused all he didn't cause it, but he certainly was probably precipitous.
Yeah,
and the kids and then growing up in a society where they are, they don't understand what it would have been like to be, effectively living their, self-actualized selves.
Yeah. So I mean, like the way you can flip it, like you can obviously from that first perspective, like we obviously, at least us three, would be not very compassionate toward the specials. Would be like, oh, these fucking like that first rhetoric of the idea of special people being held back by regular people. That's obviously not something that's going to really click with us. But on the second one, the idea of like what we were just talking about there, you get a lot of empathy for the kids, as Louis was saying, and for the family in general, I think. So it's interesting how different perspectives and how you read the film can change stuff like that. I thought a third one, the last one that I noticed was like, you could also view it as just like a basic coming of age story for Bob, where you see there was like a big theme of him. Like they talked a lot about glory days during the film, like him wanting
the
to
poster literally glory days.
That's a recurring theme in a lot of Pixar films, is that they start off with people who are to some degree much more fully realized than a lot of Hollywood characters are to begin with, and it's about them learning how to change and adapt to different circumstances in society and become a better person that way.
And in that way, you could replace superhero with like sports athlete or rock star, and Bob's toy. Kind of or cowboy toy,
or blue collar scarer.
But yeah, you can see like Bob in that way, like where
or Lightning McQueen.
Forget about him.
NASA girl.
Yep. We're gonna click away from the channel now. But yeah, I just really love that. I think that's a good sign that your film is well done.
It's
that you
good.
Can see these different kind of is good. Like that you can see these different kind of perspectives and you can see these different like analogies for what's going on.
Yeah,
so,
I think we'll cut it there because we've been going for 80 minutes.
Oh my god!
I mean,
I didn't even get to say my music thing.
Oh yeah.
That's okay.
You've been paying more attention to music lately, haven't you? As far as film scoring.
Yeah, and I won't talk about too much of it because I honestly only really saw one interesting, heard, I guess is a better way to say it, one interesting thing. But I just really loved how at the start of the film there's a lot of like orchestral, like the music is on. It's like in most scenes there's like really action adventure kind of music going on. But then as soon as we leave the 1960s or whatever that particular period and we go into the modern day, whatever modern day is for The Incredibles, there's no music at all. I love the fact that they didn't decide to have like there's a superhero theme or the action-y kind of theme and a theme for regular life. They just said there's no music.
Yep.
For regular life, and I really like that.
It
and the way that it only
accentuates that it's through expressing their powers and their superheroism that's their true selves. That's their identity released in full, while also at the same time having all the neat callbacks to James Bond scores. Because I mean, it's certainly not a particularly shocking revelation to say that this film, and indeed the key to a lot of good fun superhero films, is that you basically script them like a Bond film.
You play
that was
all
really
the
clever.
jazz.
Do you know what else the film composer Michael Giacchino, you know what else he scored?
Oh, he scored Star Trek. He was able to score a Star Wars movie finally in Rogue One. He scores most things that J. Abrams.
I'm
that
going
J.
to
Abrams
tell
makes,
you two
basically.
films.
Okay.
He scored Tomorrowland and as the ultimate full circle for today's show,
Oh boy.
The Book of Henry.
No.
Yes. Yes, we can never escape this film.
Oh god.
So good.
Look, Peter opened the box. The spirit of Henry descended upon us in great mirth. His ashes are in our bodies now. We will never be free of Henry Carpenter.
Oh my god.
I'm going to cut it there. Thanks for listening, everyone. We'll talk to you probably at the end of this week.
Goodbye.
Ciao.